Welcome back to another edition of the podcast, and tonight is our Game Week 16 National League preview and predictions. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Paul Franklin. Paul, firstly, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, mate. How are you? You out tonight, Luke, or are you staying in?
Tonight's the night to focus on the podcast, and I suppose recover, because of course with uni life and stuff, I've been out the last 2 nights, so yeah, I think financially as well, I've probably got to stay in tonight. But no, we've got Caroline who's joined us, or she's left a message anyway. She said, "Good evening, I will catch up tomorrow. I have Exeter v Plymouth as the next player plays for shots." We've had Lee who's coming. He's here every week. Your evening, lads. Welcome to the stream. Jason's with us and all. And then we've also had a Halifax Town fan who said, "Good evening, gents." Of course, as a fellow Halifax fan myself, we're hoping for a good result on Saturday when, of course, we welcome York. And we are going to be previewing that later on in the podcast. But, of course, in the National League, there's been some breaking news that's actually come out today with Altrincham. In fact, of course, Altrincham have confirmed the departure of first-team manager Phil Parkinson after 9 years at the football club. Prior to today, before he was sacked, he was the third longest-serving manager in the top 5 leagues of English football, which kind of shows you, how loyal he's been with Altrincham in the past. I think we've got to remember as well, there's been opportunities for him to, of course, move on. But the sacking does come with the side not winning a game. League game fixtures since late September. Altrincham haven't hesitated, though, to find a replacement, which we're going to come on to very shortly. But before we do that, of course, Phil Parkinson overall, I think he leaves as an Altrincham legend, considering what he's done there. 2 promotions with the club. We have to remember where Alty were. They were a club on the decline, in 2 leagues, the Stepford, 3 of non-league. He's got them back into the National League now, and he's probably had them in a position that they've never been in before. They've gone in full time. The previous 2 seasons, they've been looking to get into the playoffs. But I suppose for me, the sacking really shows the intent of Altrincham as a football club. Now they're not happy to take lower mid-table. And that's probably why they've made the change. What's your thoughts overall on it?
My initial thoughts when I saw it this morning, Luke, when the news broke, I thought, I think he's taken them as far as he can, and we talked over the last 3 seasons with Altrincham in terms of that transition they made from part-time to full-time, and the players they've got in. And listen, Phil Parsons nurtured and developed and found some very, very good, talented footballers, be it on loan or as a permanent deal down at that football club, because it's a traditional non-league club that's made their way up rather than it being an EFL team that's come back down. So they've done it possibly the hard way, if you like. It's taken them a long time, and I think knocking on the door of the playoffs over the last couple of years and not quite doing it, and this season they've just not recovered from losing the talent they've had. And it probably is just that point where he's taken them as far as he can. And he leaves Altrincham in a far better place, like you said, than when he started. He leaves a brilliant legacy. He's taken them into full-time football. He's taken them into the National League, and he's going to have to. Hopefully, he's left on really good terms. Leave with his head held high, and I can't imagine there'll be. He'll be short of suitors rather in terms of a different job if something was to come up, because what he's done at Altrincham, and they're going to be modestly paying their players. They're not going to be big budgets, are they? He's done very very well, and I think ultimately he's got them as far as he can, and it's now up to someone else to try and possibly make that next step.
Do you not think it's a case of him being a victim of his own success?
Completely that, Luke. You've only got to look at teams and where they overachieve and they can't sort of do what you don't expect them to do. Then fan bases, potentially more importantly, the board, investors, sponsors will think, well, we can do that again. We can do better than that. We're actually no. Let's be realistic. We have overachieved. It's a really tough one. I think you're probably right. I mean, if you look here, Luke, all T3 seasons really poor decision from the board. One poor start to the season after 8 years of sustained success, knee-jerk reaction, which will come to regret. And that's probably a very sensible Altrincham fan who's not just who understands that Phil Pass is probably a victim of his own success. He says their performances weren't terrible. We needed tweaks in the squad. We might go down now. We wouldn't have under Phil. Deserved at least until Christmas to turn us around. That's a fair point. You're only 2 or 3 games away from being more positive. You look at Boston last year; they did very, very well, didn't they? After Christmas, Boreham Wood did very well after Christmas to come into the National League from National League as another example. So, I think it could be a knee-jerk reaction. That's a fair summary from someone who knows the club better than we do, Luke. But from the outside, has he just taken them as far as we can? And does a fresh set of eyes need to be put on it? Possibly not. In terms of what all T360 said.
I think for me, it's going to go either way. This with Phil Parkinson, I get the impression from the board that they actually feel with the recruitment in the summer, Altrincham are actually underachieving with the actual squad itself. Where from my perspective, I don't necessarily think that's on Phil Parkinson fully. I understand, and this is football overall, isn't it? It's always a case of, if the team's underperforming, then you always look at the manager, and he's always the main guy to blame, which for me, I think at times is a little bit unfair. He's a man who's proved in the past, his track record, he can get the best out of squads. Now, there's a few characters within that Altrincham side that, to be honest, considering who they've played for in the past, considering what they've done in the past, mentioning no names, should be doing a lot better. So that's probably not helped Phil Parkinson, but of course that's on him for not getting the best out of them. Even that's what you'd say from the outside perspective. But for me, I think that's a little bit harsh at times as well. They've not been dealt nicely with injuries. I know a lot of sides have had injury problems. Halifax having, they're doing fine, but Altrincham themselves. The issue for me is, what I feel is, and I think it does come down to injuries in a certain way, is that what they've done in the summer is that, they've lost Linney, they've lost Newby, and I'm not necessarily saying, they need to find just like-for-like replacements. They need to find another hidden gem from the National League North, or, a player that's fallen out of the Football League who's going to be, the next Regan Linney, because that's very, very hard to do. It's very hard to find a replacement. But I think for Altrincham as a football club overall, what I'd have thought was, right, let's bring in a better all-rounded squad, so we're not relying on individuals like Regan Linney and Newby, because last season, that going forward, those two stole spotlight, and those two, they were relied on them for goals. I thought maybe they'd try bringing more goal scorers all round, and at the moment, it doesn't feel like that's really working. It feels like they've brought Knowles in to replace Linney. And, he's scored 8 and 9. He's scored 6 goals in the league overall, but it's not the same level as Regan Linney. And then I don't think across the whole pitch they're performing as they were last season. And in terms of strength and depth as well, I thought maybe they'd try make the squad bigger this season than, what it's previously been in case of injuries. And what we've seen is, they've had injuries, but the actual depth that they've got isn't quality depth. It's not, for example, you look at another team. I know this is probably not the best example. Well, no, actually, Halifax, for example, what they've done in the summer is they've made the squad a lot bigger, where they could probably have, maybe not this far, but they've got a starting 11, and there's probably about 6 or 7 players that could come in, replace them, and do equally as well and offer something different. I don't think Altrincham have that. I think they've relied on a starting 11 that's not been performing well, and then there's no one on the bench who can come in and improve it, if that makes sense. There's a lot of players there who've been there for a while now who probably aren't performing, who have bad injury records as well, who they're persistent on keeping. Well, I'd have thought maybe Altrincham would try go down a different route. And maybe this is where a new, fresh face could potentially do that in terms of, I think there's certain players like Matty Coslow, for example, he's clearly got ability, but he's got an awful injury record. And, I think you have someone who's just very, very well liked from Phil Parkinson, obviously managed him when he was at Namthwich as well, both there. And to be honest, I look at Matty Coslow now and I don't really see what he's offering, because half the time he's injured. Ollie Crankshaw's another one on paper, a really good winger, but he's got an awful, track record of injuries and he's not been performing well. I don't think he's scored a goal at Altrincham yet. So overall, I look at him and maybe he's probably been a little bit too loyal to the same faces. And I don't actually think they've brought in too much depth. What I will say, though, in terms of the actual performances this season, they've definitely underperformed. I think the Woking game was a true highlight of that. But there has also been times where they've been a little bit unfortunate statistically as well. They've been doing a lot better than the results that they're getting. And I think we had Ryan on from NL Musings, and he mentioned that if they keep playing how they are doing, then they're going to be they're in a little bit of a false position, and they will be able to improve. What would you say? What I've just said are.
No, I mean, I was just going through my head, like, as you had sort of saying, digested, Luke. I think Mickey sort of come up here and said, how do you replace Linney and Newby without spending big? It's that they were able to unearth or give those players a platform to perform. And ultimately, clubs higher up the National League or higher up the food chain of the Football League are going to grab these footballers, because Altrincham are a well-established non-league family-based football club, haven't got the biggest fan base, haven't got the best ground, are full-time. But one of the bigger clubs, with all due respect to Altrincham, they come knocking with any quality that these guys are going to go. And there's way less newbies and Linneys available than there is other players. So, and we're all scrambling for them. Halifax looking for them, Wealdstone looking for them, Gateshead, Truro. We're all looking for that nugget, that quality, that Con Clark, all that sort of, they've had them as well. So, yeah, I agree. Injuries, maybe being loyal. I genuinely just do think that maybe is it as far as he's gone? Do they need a new fresh set of eyes on the squad? Interestingly, though, from that perspective, Luke, bringing in Neil Gibson, who had a short spell with Wealdstone and managed to keep Wealdstone up at the back end of last year and did a fantastic job with his assistant Lee Jones, sort of to parachute him in to be the interim manager whilst they look for a manager is quite it's not smart usual. It's smart. It's not usual. Normally, you get someone from inside the club. I think that shows the measure of Altrincham as a club, where they probably haven't got the resource to bring someone from the youth team, from the academy, from the reserves to take over, because of the size of the club Altrincham are. So, they've acted quickly. They clearly had this in their mind for a couple of weeks. They've gone and got Neil Gibson. Is he now going to showcase his ability to be the manager full time? Have they got that in mind, or have they got someone else in mind that they need to go and get? And in the short term, for a bit of stability, have Gibbo and Lee Jones in there. So, good luck to them, because they're a sensible football club, and that's another sensible move. And it's I hope that the Alty 360 is wrong for his sake, that they could go down, because I generally can't see Altrincham going down.
No, I don't think they'll go down.
Altrincham going down. I think they will improve. Gibbo certainly got the best out of a squad at Wealdstone who were looking doomed. And Luke, we were involved at the back end of last season with Halifax playing this last game of the season. He pulled them through and got and it's another firefighting job for him to do, really, with Altrincham, just to stabilise and maybe get them mid-table, away from that relegation fear, and then they can start building again.
I actually think if they'd have kept Phil Parkinson, I think they'd have stayed up. But I think even making this decision, I think they'll stay up as well. For me, overall, I do repeat myself here, but I just feel for Phil Parkinson because of what he's done there. 16 games and you're out of the door. They're not actually even in the drop zone. So I just feel it's a little bit harsh, and I felt that they should have potentially just stuck with him based on what he's previously done. I felt like maybe they owed it to him to probably, as long as they don't go down or look like they're going down, give him the season, if that even meant that they weren't going to be pushing for playoffs. Because for me now with Alty, I don't think it matters who they appoint at this point. I think the recruitment in the summer is the reason that they're not going to be up there like they potentially want. I think they'll stay up, yes, but I think they would have under Phil Parkinson. But I think based on that recruitment in the summer, I can't see them doing much more than mid-table this season overall. To be honest, no matter who they've got in as the manager. But considering letting someone go so quickly, I just feel like they've got a set plan, which is pretty good. I think overall, they've already brought in an interim manager, as you've mentioned, in Neil Gibson. It's a smart one as well, because Neil Gibson last season got the best out of that Wealdstone squad, and he got them to safety on that final day. I get that kind of vibe off of Neil Gibson. It's also that never say die type of attitude he wants within his team. And that might be something that, Altrincham are lacking at the moment. He can potentially, give them. But no, I think it's good, smart on an interim basis as well, because of that potential there. If he does do well with Altrincham, then they might make him the permanent one. But if it's not going well, they can always go down a different route. And I think Mickey's mentioned it here. He said that there'll be plenty of takers for the Altrincham job, and I totally agree with that. I think if you look at the three sides in the division that don't have a manager at the moment, Hartlepool, Aldershot, and Altrincham. Altrinham's the most attractive for me by quite a stretch. Aldershot have come out and basically mentioned that. The budget-wise, they've got quite a low budget within this division. Seems like a bit of a fiasco there based on, Tommy Widrington leaving the way he did. And then also you look at Hartlepool themselves with the ownership issues. They're not nice atmospheres, particularly Hartlepool. It's not a nice place to be going into at the moment when you look at their track record. I think if you look at Altrincham, they look like an ambitious club that are full-time now. And it's clear that, Phil Parkinson was there for 9 years, so why can't they find another manager potentially who can do that? And I think the next step for them now is to be consistently competing at the top and one day getting back into the Football League.
No, I agree. And it's certainly a job that if I was a manager, I'd be looking at going, well, you've got all the bases to kick on. Hartlepool are a little bit of a basket case off the field. Aldershot don't really know what's going on there, do we, Luke? I mean,
no.
Tommy Widrington leaving to go to the league below, albeit to a team that he knew of and was there 13 years ago, and there's a bit of sentiment there. And it may be a move for him in terms of his personal health and his time of his career. And again, someone who's taken Aldershot as far as he could take them. And he's just sort of bowed out and gone, well, I've got the opportunity, let's go whilst the going's good, sort of thing. So I think you're right. Altrincham, without a shadow of a doubt, is an attractive proposition. Stable off the field, got a squad there that's tapped with potential. I think now Neil Gibson's in the seat to try and get that job on a full-time basis, and there won't be any. As like Mickey said, there won't be short of suitors, and it's just who it may be. And I suppose because they know that, they could get some really good quality sort of applicants. They're going to take their time to make sure that, they get that right person. Because having had Phil Parkinson for 9 years, Luke, they don't know a lot of different, for a long time. So this next appointment is really quite crucial to them for the stability of the club, for the whether they actually kick on or whether they're going to have to, start to sort of struggle, consolidate, or end up struggling in the league. It's a really, really important appointment for Altringham's board. So, I can see why they're not gonna rush it, and they seem fairly sensible. So it'll be a sensible appointment as well.
Yeah, I think for me they've got safe hands with Neil Gibson there. I liked what I saw at Wealdstone last season. Considering everything that happening there, they were in quite a bad position, and he felt like after the I think it was the name's gone out of my head for some reason. The ex-Solihull, the one who went to Solihull, who I don't know why it's gone out of my head. You know it, Paul.
What is it? Is Solihull now?
No, he got sacked. Why is it going out of my head? I know. Matt Taylor. There we go. I don't know why that went out of my head, but when he left there, Wealdstone could have easily gone downhill because your manager you've had from the start of the season when they start to have a turn of form. Anyway, Gibson came in, did a brilliant job for me overall of keeping Wealdstone up. I don't think they had any right, to be honest, of staying up last season, considering some of the sides around them, and he did a very good job. For me, when you consider some of the other sides that went down, for example, Dagenham. We've had Bailey who's come in there. He's a Tamworth fan, and we do need to speak about Tamworth because we haven't really touched on them considering their current position. Big up, lads. Can't believe we're playing well. 10 games unbeaten in all competitions. Up the Tamworth. Once again, some people at the start of the season may have thought, right, they had a good year last year. They were an unknown quantity. Maybe this year now they're going to be a little bit more found out and they might struggle a little bit more in this division. If anything, they're doing better than what they were last season.
Oh, incredible! And we talked early on in doing the predictions and the fact that Tamworth play in a particular style and our club's going to work them out. Second season syndrome, having to build on what you've got or consolidate what you got. They lost a couple of decent players to other clubs, and we all thought Tamworth were going to potentially really struggle here, and 10 unbeaten, and they're doing fantastically well, and they've got Boston on Saturday, which is a winnable game for them. So they go 11 unbeaten. They're up to 8th in the league. They're in joint positions with Southend, almost identical records. I think Southend are only above them because Tamworth don't score many, don't let them in the end. So the goal difference is what's holding them back from being in the playoffs. But I think they're one of these clubs, Luke, and hopefully, Bailey will agree. And it's not being disrespectful, that they just need to get to that 50-point mark, and then whatever they go from there is, So at the moment, knocking on the playoffs, absolutely no reason why they can't keep doing that. But ultimately, they're going to be looking and going, we're comfortably outside the relegation zone. So, fair play to them, because we've spoken to their gaffer last season. He was very honest and open about how he approaches it, what they've got. They again, very sensibly sort of probably building little incremental differences and improvements on and off the field. And it's really showing. And, long may it continue for Tamworth fans. Not the most attractive team to watch, very effective at what they do, get results. And that's all that they need to worry about.
I know last season as well, he actually mentioned, didn't he, that, it'd be great to see Tamworth in the playoffs, but potentially it would be a bit early for them to be inside the playoffs, like at the back end of last season. Do you feel like this season it's the same case for them, or do you feel they are actually in a better position if they can get into the playoffs come the end of the season to compete and it be an advantage being involved in a competition like that?
Interesting what Bailey says here. The only thing we don't have is a good striker. Our centre-back's got 4 goals. That may come back to bite them in the long run, because we all need decent centre-forwards. We all need 10, 15, 20 goals a season player. We talk about the Linneys of this world, Con Clarks, the lad at Eastleigh's just got injured. He's played in the National League a long time. Those sorts of players, they don't come along often. That may be longer term, between now and the end of the season, might come back to bite them. But they're very miserly in defence, Luke. They've scored 19, but they've let 19 in. They're not horrifically defensively poor. And if you can stay in games, you could get draws, you might get wins. So I'm pretty sure Andy Peakes is going to be looking at this and saying, where can we improve? The striker's position is going to be the one. And if they're in a strong position in January, February, where in the transfer market, loan deals, etc. Look, they've got something to offer. We're a team that's on the ball, on the brink of the playoffs or in the playoffs. Come and play for us. That then might be something that's really useful to them.
Let's take a look at some of Tuesday night's action then. On the topic of Morecambe, I think they surprised everyone potentially, but it does feel like if Morecambe do win a game, they're always going to win big when every blue moon it does come around. Away to Boston on a Tuesday night, and they beat them by 4-0. Carlisle's Blues has come in and said, I watched them the other week against Scunthorpe. Good going forward, Morecambe, but kamikaze at the back. And to be fair, I'm kind of the same. I suppose as games go on, what I've often seen, particularly, looking at that Halifax game, is they're getting weaker as games are going on because of that fitness level. But I suppose now it's getting to a point where players should be getting back to full fitness. And maybe that result is what's kind of, I suppose, keeping the ownership, I suppose, content with keeping Ashby Johal on at the moment. And that is because, it's not just the odd win every so often. When they are winning games, they're putting sight to the sword. And maybe that shows the potential of Morecambe as this season goes on. Or do you just think it's a freak result and you're still a little bit on?
Is it a freak result? It's a freak result looking at their performances.
The clean sheet was freak more than the 4 goals.
I think you're probably right. The other win they've got is against Wealdstone, and they scored 4 goals in that, but let 3 in. So yeah, I think the refreshing thing for Morecambe fans is that they've kept a clean sheet, and as Carlisle Blue says, they're kamikaze at the back. But if you can keep clean sheets or keep the goals down that you're going to let in, the quality they clearly have going forward and the way that they play, they're going to win games more than they don't. They're a bit like Aldershot, aren't they? They're entertainers of the league, but they just need to be able to be on the right side of the scoreline. It's all well and good being entertainers. It's all well and good the gaffer coming out and saying in a few months' time we'll have one of the best teams in the country, etc., etc. But if you're shipping goals like they're shipping goals, then you're going to lose more games than you win.
Mm-hmm.
The other night, they as John Johnson has said here, I wonder if they finally turned the corner, they knackered a few bets. They did. No one would have put, not necessarily Boston to win. It might have been a draw, but no one would have put Morecambe to win 4-0. So have they turned the corner? I think Saturday's important. Just looking here, who do they go to? They go to Eastleigh.
But that's a tough fixture. After you
want
a game at home, don't you? After you've got that not as far away, apart from Truro, as you could possibly get from Morecambe.
Yeah, you've got to follow it up. That's what they've got to do now. They've got to follow this up with a win, a couple of draws, a couple of wins, and not the losses. And then hopefully you'll then say confidently, yes, we think they've turned the corner. If they go and lose 2 or 3, then Luke, you've got to look and go, that was a freak result, right? So I think the next few weeks is determines that, and that may sound obvious, but I think that's where they're at with how they are. But they'll take a load of confidence from it because they've kept a clean sheet without a shadow of a doubt. So fair play to them. It's they're just playing their part in what is always a bonkers league anyway.
Yeah, I don't think they could probably get, apart from maybe facing probably Carlisle at the moment, or York, or Boreham Wood even. I don't think they could get a worse fixture now to be going as far away as you can do against Eastleigh. You've got a new manager. Of course, we're going to come on to that shortly, but it's a really tough fixture for them after they must take so much confidence from that to travel all that way. It's a tough one for them. But I suppose with the confidence they've got, who's to say they can't win it? I don't think anyone expected them to go to Boston and win how they have done, and they did. As for Boston, I suppose it's just a night to forget, to be honest, for them. Don't really know what to think of them so far this season. 16th, I think there was quite a lot of optimism about them because of that second half of the season last year. And to be honest, at the moment, the 5 points above the drop zone, and a 16th place finish. Would that be acceptable for Boston? Probably, but it just feels like for them, maybe a lot of people thought they were going to be a bit more of a dark horse this year, and that they've not really, have they?
No, and I don't think anyone would be unhappy with anything more rather than sort of fifth from bottom. Where they were at Christmas time last year, they shouldn't even be in this league. So to be in this league, to say, well, they want a dark horses potentially, again, they had to turn their squad. They had to rely on youth and youngsters. It's going to be tough for them. And I think if they finish fifth from bottom, they're going to be happy. That's what they're looking at. I mean, it says here, and Luke Smith has stated here, Luke, Boston have 8 key players out injured. Any team's going to struggle with 8 key players, any team. And the likes of Boston will struggle more because teams like that can't have the strength in depth and the quality in depth. So, if they can get a few of those injured players back, I know one of them, I can't remember his name, is longer term, it's going to cause them problems. So hopefully that doesn't affect them too much, and they can start picking up some points.
We've had Leo, if I believe he's referring to Morecambe. They played well against us last Saturday, but never took their chances. We've also had Jonathan, who's come in, Crav, who's a friend of the channel. He said, R.E. Alter, any club that loses qualities of Chris Clark, a 20-plus season striker, the irreplaceable Regan Linnett, and the wizardry of Alex Newby tearing it up at York will struggle. Parky and Sorves, Alty, legends, of course. Yeah, the assistant as well, who's been there just as long as Phil Parkinson. It's just a little bit sad the way it's ended, I suppose, for Altrincham, with him being there so long, for him to actually be sacked. But we'll come on to the York v Boreham Wood game. Of course, but a York fan who's coming, I believe, said even Gents York versus Bournemouth was a great advert for the National League on Tuesday night. Think a draw was probably a fair result. Looking forward to my trip to the Shire this Saturday. Yeah, York clinched a last-minute equaliser to take a point away, finished in a 2-2 draw. As for Bournemouth, though, they were disappointed they didn't take all 3 points. However, for them now, that is, I believe, 14 games unbeaten in the National League. The only defeat actually came on the opening day. What a story for them, considering they've got to go to Carlisle, they've had to go to Scunthorpe, York. Of course, Forest Green isn't any easy on Saturday, but 14 games unbeaten at the moment. Why are they not in this title race?
I completely agree. I don't think anyone would have had Bournemouth second at this stage of the season. It's incredible. Fair play to Luke Garrard. Fair play to his team. He's got a good mix of defenders and a defence that's not letting goals in. They've scored near enough the most goals in the league with 29. Many of us have never said that about Bournemouth over the last few years in talking National League. Always miserly, never let goals in, difficult to break down. But they're now complementing that with that going forward and scoring goals. Perfect blend, Luke. Perfect blend. And, the dark horse as we speak in the league. And to go to somewhere like York midweek, go 1-0 up in the first minute and pick a draw up at the end of the day. I didn't see the game. I was out, so I can't comment, but I've seen on social media and spoken to a few people there and said, it was a really good advert for the game, for the league, as stated there. Someone even said you would have enjoyed it, Paul. It was a good game to watch, and I think York are going to be pleased with the draw after going 1-0 down. Bournemouth will probably think, if we just done a bit more, might nick the points. But you got to respect that point. Going to York away, getting a point midweek, that's brilliant for Bournemouth, and doesn't let up for them. They got Forest Green away on Saturday, so fair play. 14 games unbeaten, tremendous.
We've had James who's coming. I want to kind of highlight this. Coming, said they were the best team I've seen at the NLE this year. A draw was a fair result. That's not the only person who said, or the only team who actually said that Bournemouth are the best side. I think Scunthorpe, when they played them, said that Bournemouth were the best side that they've seen this season. And it feels like when you look at it now that going down was a blessing in disguise. It's kind of allowed them to rebuild and have that new identity about them, particularly for Luke Garrard, even potentially him taking time out of football. Maybe it's giving him that time to kind of progress, his style. It always felt like Bournemouth. They were very predictable, but it was effective, that old, traditional industrial style. And, he often relied on individuals like Tishamanga to, score the goals for them. Of course, they had that one horrendous season where they slipped into the National League South. They've since come back up this year. And now I am shocked with the way they play. It's, fast-flowing, direct, it's excellent to watch. They're actually enjoyable to watch. And it's quite amusing because 2 years ago, even when they were in the playoffs every year, consistently competing, everyone were like, "Oh, you're facing Bournemouth." It'd be like a case they're just a boring side to watch. That's why we have the name Bournemouth. But you can't use that anymore because this season they've actually just been really good to watch, and they're giving teams really good games. And to be honest, this might sound a little bit ambitious and a little bit out there, but who's to say they're not in this title race? The 14 games unbeaten. The one thing they've got that other sides around them don't have as well is the fact that Luke Garrard and a few members in Spawn Woodside know this league like the back of their hand. There's still players in there alongside Luke Garrard, the manager, who've been actually third and fourth in the past. But this season, the way they're playing, it don't feel like they're getting fortunate. It feels like they're a true contender. And the only reason that I suppose no one's really viewing them as like the Carlisle or the York or the Forest Green is because of that budget. But, Bournemouth, to be fair to them, they're not a poor side in this division. They've got owners that will back them when they want to, and they will keep this squad together. I don't think I'd be too concerned that, individuals are going to get stolen in January. And even if they are, I think they'll be able to find the replacements for them. So I think everyone should watch this space with Bournemouth because, they know what this league is about.
I'll be interested, what Carlisle said, Carlisle Blue 97-4. So they, although we're at 3-1, we should have held out for the win. But credit to them, I think a point was a fair result. They did it to Sutton. I think they won 4-3 at Sutton when they were behind and drawing. So there's clearly a little bit of resoluteness about them, grinding out results. And I think that comes with playing with confidence. And as someone else, Mickey Barris, has mentioned, Tom White's a great player. We talked about Phil Parkinson not being able to find that little gem. This time round, Luke Garrard's found a little gem in Tom White, and he's taken the lead by storm. So if you've got someone like that spearheading your attack with a good defence and a resolution, then and again, fair play to Carlisle Blue mentioning Abdul Malik's quality. Wealdstone had him on loan a couple of seasons ago when he was at Millwall, and that kid had all the ability in the world, slightly inconsistent, and that's he was learning to play in the men's game. He was coming from academy football. He was playing at England age group level. You could see on his day that he had an amazing amount of ability. What he's doing now is he's got himself into the National League. He's got himself used to the National League, and he's got himself consistent in terms of his performances. And from what I'm led to believe, he is absolutely frightening defenders. And if you've got him who can transition from defence, the ball from defence to attack, someone that can take that ball forward, break the lines, all those sorts of things that we talk about in football, that's exciting, then you're always going to be onto a winner and can win football matches. Couple that with someone like Tom White, who it is to be seen whether he's obviously a good footballer. Can he consistently do it over the next 2 or 3 years? But at the moment, he's in a great vein of form, and long may that continue for Boreham Wood. So, really, really refreshing to see that someone is breaking into that top 7 who we may not have discussed. And I certainly look. We've got Boreham Wood over the Christmas period, but as Wealdstone. So, hopefully their form might dip by then. Otherwise, we could be in for a long, hard sort of Boxing Day. So, long may it continue for Boreham Wood fans. But in terms of the advert for the National League, they're a really good team for the league, and they deserve to be where they are.
Yeah, of course, when you look at the centre-back partnership with Chris Bush and Callum Reynolds, those two, two experienced heads, and this is a comment that I do want to highlight as well. Have Boreham Wood got enough strength in depth for a full season? Defensively, I think they have. I think if you look, there's Islami, who's been there, if I pronounce that right, the centre-back, he's been at Boreham Wood for a very long time now. I think if he slotted in, he'd do an excellent job if he was needed. Even the striker, I think, you've got Bush, who's on form at the moment. You've got someone like Luke Norris, himself, who was scoring a few goals earlier on in the season too. For me, maybe going forward, it's the likes of Abdul Malik or Sousa. If either of those, or maybe even Zach Brunt, if any of that front line got injured, that's when maybe I'd be a little bit concerned. But wouldn't even like Carlisle, for example, if we say this, if Regan Linney got injured, or Chris Clark got injured, I think we'd be back to what we saw of Carlisle earlier on in the season, where I actually don't think there'd be a contender. Does that make sense? I think you have to look at every side. The key players, they're injured, you struggle. But I'll tell you something about the best players in this division. They don't often get injured as much, if that makes sense. Like last season, I can't remember when Manny Disaruwes had a serious injury, Regan Linney, Pierce. These players don't. And that could be the case with Boreham Wood as well, with the likes of Abdul Malik. They're excellent individuals that are only going to get better. And I think with every side, to be honest, there's always that risk of, if they get injured, we may struggle. But I think you could use the same for someone like Carlisle. Yes, they'd have a budget to be able to recruit players to replace them. But even that, I think, is a tough job no matter how much money you've got. And I think, to be honest, with Boreham Wood, if one of those got injured, I'd probably back Garrard to be able to find a hidden gem to replace them. So I'm not too concerned about the strength in depth thing. And like I've said, they know this division like the back of their hand, unlike Carlisle, who've never been in this league. Forest Green have only had 2 seasons since they've come back down. This is only their second season with Robbie Savage, who, although has done very well so far, it's his first season in the National League. even York City themselves. Stuart Maynard, great manager, what he did at Wealdstone. Of course, League Two experience, but he's never been in a title race in the National League before. And I think you could use the same across the board, where Boreham Wood, Luke Garrard, has actually been top of the league with Boreham Wood in the past. And this new formula for me of the way they're playing is just excellent. And there's a reason everyone's going out and saying that Boreham Wood are the best team they've seen. So why can't they compete for the title?
No, I completely agree. I mean, you can temper it, and I think you're right. Lee Harlow said it's still only late October, and suspensions, injuries come in. That will really be the crux of it: is how deep can they go with this good form without injuries? I think naturally they would struggle a little bit potentially over other teams if that does occur. But you're right. It's amazing when you're doing well how less injured your players are as well, if that makes sense, right? So, I'm not suggesting players don't have a go when they're struggling, but no player will want to not play when you're winning games and you're in that good vein of form. So, all of that helps. But I certainly don't think Boreham Wood should be sort of discounted from it. But in terms of them, where does their experience lie? I think you're right. Garrard's got that experience. They've got players that got that experience. They're going to be in the mix. And, I think it's great for the likes of Boreham Wood to be competing with Carlisle, with York, with Forest Green, with Rochdale, some of those bigger teams. And I think Carlisle, Rochdale, York will enjoy the battle. So, a fair play to Boreham Wood for getting in the mix so early on. And let's see how long it continues.
We're going to move on to predictions, but Mickey said the underlying question, Luke, how is uni life going? Or to be Luke's age again? It's going all right, to be fair, so far. As I previously mentioned, though, I won't be going out tonight. We've also had John, who's come in and said Carlisle have a billionaire owner, Luke. So have Wrexham, but they didn't get promoted. The only league that's stopped them from getting promotion since the new ownership is, the National League. It's a really hard league to get out for. And John's mentioned as well, Luke seems to think Linney is Carlisle's only good player. Him and Con Clark going forward, you heavily rely on that. I still stand by that. I think there's a reason that, most of the moves that Carlisle do, most of the goals, the centrepiece is always through Regan Linney. And I've mentioned that bringing in Con Clark gives them that other option now. But like I said, if any of those get injured again, I think Carlisle will be back to square one. I think at the moment, I think they're going to go on a really good run now with those two. But what I'm saying when I say that is I'm trying to compare that to Boreham Wood when we go on about key players getting injured and having strength in depth. I think a lot of sides, if the key players get injured, I think they'd struggle. So I don't think you could point that at Boreham Wood in terms of them. That's the reason they might fall away later on in the season. But anyway, we're going to go on to the predictions now. Please remember to like and subscribe. I genuinely would appreciate if you could do that. It does help us out a lot. These are the current scores on the doors. Paul, you've taken the lead. 93 points to me to 96 to you. 12 points last week for you. That's very good going.
Yeah, I did all right last week. I surprised myself. I think I got 2 or 3 correct results, or scores rather, and picked up some results as well. So yeah, it was a good playing week for me last week. And you always like 1 or 2 goals away from it being really good. And I sort of every week when I start looking at it towards the end, think, I could pick up points here. But there's always late twists in all these games. But I did all right, so I can't complain.
Anyway, if you want to play along with the Predictions League, this is how you do that. Starting things off then with the first game, it will actually be Braintree versus Altrincham, which will be an interesting one. Before we do that, I'll just reply to this final comment. It's gone. We won 5-2 against Linney on the bench. That was in the FA Cup, but also Chris Clark started, and guess what? He scored 2 goals for you, and he was the centrepiece once again. So what I'm saying is, those two are the centrepiece to everything that you're doing, which I'm not saying is an issue. I think most sides have to allow in key players. And I'm saying, I'm trying to compare it to Bournemouth. But anyway, we'll move on to the next the fixture that we're going to look at first. And it's quite an interesting game, a bit of a 6-pointer as well. Both sides are currently down there. I think Altrincham are 20th and Braintree themselves are 21st. But if Braintree win this game, they will go above Altrincham. And Altrincham will drop into the drop zone, which is quite interesting considering was it a good time to be sacking Phil Parkinson or not, particularly coming into this fixture. But like you've said, they've made a very quick appointment bringing in someone like Neil Gibson who knows how to survive in this division. And to be fair, because of that, I'm going to back Altrincham in this game. Braintree been not the best at home this season, particularly recently as well. As for Altrincham, under new management now, we often see that new manager bounce, if you like. And I think under someone like Neil Gibson, who, like I've said, will really make his side up for it. He's quite an enthusiastic manager. I get that kind of impression. And he can get the best out of sides when potentially they've not been performing well. And I think they will do that. I'm going to go for a 2-1 Altrincham win. How do you see it going, Paul?
I agree with you. I've gone with a 2-0 Altrincham win. I do think Altrincham are a better football team than Braintree. I think Altrincham are in a false position currently. I get that you're where you are because of what's happened, but I think genuinely they're in a false position. They're better than what they are, whereas I don't think Braintree are, if that makes sense. So I think it's a nice game for Neil Gibson to come into. Might not be at home, but it's a nice game. Not going to a Forest Green or a Boreham Wood or a Carlisle. If they're going to somewhere that's winnable, and they're going to have that will be the message. They've only come in today, so they're not going to do a huge amount, be able to put across anything too difficult or change too much. Be a simple message. I think they'll just want to go out there and try and get off to winning ways. So yeah. I've gone 2-0 to Altrincham.
2-0 to Altrincham then. Moving on to the next fixture that we'll have a look at. Get your comments in, guys, and we will put them on the screen. And not just in terms of the predictions either. If you have anything to say about either side or on going into this game, then please do let us know and we will read out your comments. But moving on to the next game that we'll have a look at, it will be Eastleigh versus Morecambe then. Like I've mentioned, it doesn't feel like the kindest of games for Morecambe. In terms of geography wise, considering they've got a great win on Tuesday night against Boston away from home. They've now got to travel all that way down to Eastleigh against an Eastleigh side themselves who under new management, I should say, have only had 1 defeat in 5, which came against Boreham Wood, the most informed side in the division at the moment. So for that reason, with Morecambe, it has been the trend all season is they haven't been able to back up that win. And for that reason, I'm going to go for an Eastleigh 3-2 win. I think it'll be quite an entertaining one, but I think Eastleigh will win. I think it'll be quite a good game, though. There's quite a high score in both sides. Been known to score a few more goals, particularly Eastleigh in recent weeks. And, Morecambe themselves have been involved in a lot of high-scoring games. So, yeah, I'm going to go for a 3-2 Eastleigh win. How do you see it going?
Yeah, I mean, high scoring on here, isn't it? Eastleigh 1, Morecambe 3, Eastleigh 2, Morecambe 0, 2-1, 3-2, 4-4.
That's not out of the question, though. Like, if you wanted to do like a bet that, like, if you put like a pound on, the odds will be brilliant for that because it's a freak result in out of the question. When we did that Aldershot game last, I'm not trying to brag, but that Aldershot, was it Solihull where I said 4-3? It genuinely was just, it could be a freak result based on previous games. And I think that is the case for this one. If you were to kind of put a prediction that was out there, you probably would go like 4-4 or something silly like that for this one. Yeah,
I mean, John Johnson's made a point after 4-0 on Tuesday. I haven't got a clue on this one. I didn't go quite as bad as 4-4. I went for 2-2. I think Carlisle Blues said can't see Morecambe going down too good in attack. It depends how much they can claw back now and how consistent they can be in winning games, I think. Just needs time at the back, which fully appreciate, and they may well do that again on the weekend and get another another clean sheet. I don't think so, but I've gone with a more conservative 2-2 draw.
Someone's going to have to 4-0 on Tuesday. I haven't got a clue on this one. Yeah, it's made it a little bit more harder, but no, I think Eastleigh will win this game. I like the look of them, to be honest, under the new manager now. Someone said, has there been a 0-0 game this season yet? I'm sure there has. Yeah, they must have been.
Wealdstone drew 0-0 with the team had a player sent off. I'd have to look at let me have a look. But I know definitely Wealdstone drew 0-0 with Eastleigh, funny enough. There you go.
Eastleigh.
Yeah.
We'll move on to the next fixture now. There'll be loads, but it's just hard. I know Halifax haven't, but it's hard to remember. This is an interesting game. Potentially the game of the game week, you could say. I've picked the other one just because of it being a Yorkshire derby, but Forest Green versus Boreham Wood. Forest Green, I think, are now winless in 4, aren't they now? And they're coming up against a Boreham Wood side who haven't been defeated in 14 games. So, you probably would say Forest Green are just about favourites with them being at home, but it's a really tough one, this. I'm actually going to go for a 1-1 draw. Forest Green, to be fair to when they have come up against the title contenders this season, they haven't actually won a game against any of them. They've lost to Carlisle, they drew to York at home, they lost to Rochdale at home. Even the Scunthorpe game, they drew that at home. They only got an equaliser late on. Potentially, these cause for a little bit of concern for Forest Green when it's coming up against those sides around them in the league. And like I said, it's not getting any easier. Boreham Wood have not lost since the opening day. Forest Green, like I mentioned, on a poor run of form at the moment. For their standards, I will say, when I say a poor run of form. I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. I think Forest Green will be desperate to get back to winning ways. Actually played well against Carlisle, but I think just Carlisle were just too good on the day. And I think, if they keep that up and after that game, I think they'll be able to get a result. But I can't back against Boreham Wood again after that York game where they got a point there and nearly won. So I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. How do you see it going?
It's a really tough one because Boreham Wood are brilliant going forward. Forest Green are misfiring a little bit. Boreham Wood are good at the back. I'm going to go with Boreham Wood winning 3-2.
Really? That's quite a bold one, I suppose, in a way, based with Forest Green being at home. But, if that was the case and Rochdale slipped up this game, Boreham would be top of the National League, which is ridiculous considering, they've only just got promoted from the National League South. But, no, this is certainly a fixture to keep an eye on. Fortunately, as the Halifax-York game is a 12:30 kickoff, I should be able to get back, and this will be the game that I will be putting on my TV. But moving on to the next fixture, Gateshead versus Truro. It's an extremely long journey for Truro. I was actually really impressed with them last game week. Very high energy side, energetic. I felt throughout the game as I was watching them that maybe as the game went on later that they would tire. I didn't think they could potentially, be able to keep up that momentum throughout the game. But if anything, they got better as the game went on. I can clearly see what their issue has been. It has been in both boxes. They made a silly mistake to give Halifax the opening goal. And then, the opportunities-wise, they probably should have scored a few more after that. And obviously, they did get the 2 goals. But you can see, I think I've seen in previous weeks, they've not been able to put the ball in the back of the net. But in terms of their overall players aside, they play some pretty tidy stuff under John Askey, but of course I feel like away from home that has been their downfall this season, and against a Gateshead side that themselves like to play quite similar, I would say. I'm going to go for Gateshead to win this. Truro yet to win away, very as far away as you can probably get apart from Carlisle. I'm going to go for a 3-1 Gateshead win. How do you see it going?
I've gone for exactly the same, Luke. 3-1 win. 900 odd miles to Truro. I think who mentioned in the week that Morecambe was a coupon buster in the bets. I think Truro beating Halifax last Saturday was a real coupon buster.
Yeah, they deserved it though. To be fair, it wasn't like a freak result. I think they deserve that win. I'll give it.
No, to them. And that's fair enough. It's they're going to have to look at that and go, well, we can beat Halifax top 6. Gateshead we've got to go there and try and get something. 915-mile round trip. That's a long way to go. And I think similar to you, Luke, Gateshead will just be a little bit too canny and will win 3-1.
Moving on to the next fixture that we will take a look at, it's going to be Hartlepool versus Solihull. And surprisingly, Hartlepool are strong favourites to win this game with the bookies. Solihull Moors, it feels like a perfect game for a Chris Millington-esque performance. Hartlepool struggling to score at the moment, potentially defensively okay, I would say. But as for Solihull Moors themselves, under Millington, they're going to be very well organised at Hartlepool, and I think Hartlepool will struggle to break them down, and Solihull will probably be able to beat them on the breaks. I'm going to go for a 1-0 Solihull Moors win. How do you see it going?
Yeah, this isn't the most exciting game of the game week, is it? It's I've gone for a 1-1 draw. Managerless Hartlepool, don't score many. Solihull, still getting used to Millington, who's a decent manager at National League level. Yeah, just that, nothing really excites me. So yeah, Hartlepool 1, Solihull 1.
Hartlepool are the fourth lowest scorers in the National League this season. I think a big reason is the fact that that star man in Alex Reid isn't even playing at the moment half of the games, and he's not performing when we know he's got the ability to. So I think it's quite frustrating, particularly if you are a Hartlepool fan. But the next game that we're going to move on to is going to be Scunthorpe United versus Aldershot, and this is another quite easy one. Aldershot managerless. I actually think they're going to be weaker now. Witherington's gone. I don't like that at all, the fact that he's left, particularly with his style and the side being used to that for so long. It's been interesting to see how they act now in terms of, is it going to be more defensive minded so they're not conceding as many, or are they going to try keep that type of style going, which I think is going to be really hard to keep going without Witherington there to enforce it. And away at Scunthorpe, who got a point at Eastleigh, quite a good point in my opinion, have actually had a great reaction since that defeat to Carlisle. They've still only had one defeat all season. They've not gone on a bad run. I'm going to back Scunthorpe to win this game. I'm actually going to go for a 4-1 Scunthorpe win. How do you see it going?
Blimey, 4-1.
Yeah.
I've gone for a good Scunthorpe. Two entertaining teams, two teams that like to score goals, two teams that potentially could let goals in. I think Scunthorpe, again, are just a better side, more settled, doing very, very well in this league without a shadow of a doubt. Incredible how they've come up and pushed on to fourth place. And Luke, you've got to remember, they've only lost one game themselves, and that was against Carlisle, and that was only a 1-0 loss. So, they've got to be feared in this league at the moment, Scunthorpe, and Aldershot will not want to be going there with no manager the last couple of weeks they've had. I think they'll put up a good fight, but I think Scunthorpe will win 3-2.
It's quite an entertaining one, a lot closer than I thought you might have gone for, to be fair. But no, we'll move on to the next game, and this is quite an easy one for me. Brackley yet to win away from home this season. Speaking about 0-0s, there's no way Brackley have not been involved in a 0-0.
They played 3-0 Gateshead last week.
Yeah, exactly. But no, they're facing Southend side away from home at Roots Hall. Quite an easy one for me. I think I'm going to go for a 2-0 Southend win. There's not much more to really say on it. Brackley have struggled away from home this season. I think like Truro, they're both very similar, where I think they're both difficult places to go, where there's a lot of banana skins will be seen, as we've seen with Brackley already, with Rochdale struggling there. But I feel just on the road, those two sides are probably going to struggle this season. And Roots Hall, I always just view it as a very difficult place to go. And I think Southend will win this game 2-0. How do you see it going?
I've gone with 3-0 Southend. I think it's similar to you, Luke.
One of the
easier games to predict, and that may come back to bite us in the bum, because Brackley will probably pull out a stellar performance and get some out of it. But I genuinely can't see it down at Roots Hall. And Brackley, they're very, very miserly in defence. They just can't score goals. They've scored 10 and only let 13 in. You've got to score more than 10 goals if you want to they're fairly consistent. 1-4, drawn 5, lost 5. They're just, I suppose, from their perspective, win 1, lose 1, win 1, draw 1, win. They're going to keep themselves above that bottom 4. But I don't think that's going to happen on Saturday. I think Southend will win 3-0.
Moving on to the next fixture that we'll have a look at is going to be. I'm going to actually bring in. I'll tell you at the end. But I'm just thinking with that game because that'll probably be mine. But we'll bring in a new feature for the Predictions League anyway. But no, we'll move on to your team, Wealdstone versus Sutton. Sutton, another side that are yet to win away from home this season. But they've been involved in a lot of high-scoring games under the new manager, as I think we all expected, based on his previous style that he played at Worthing. And I think over time, I think he'll do quite well at Sutton with the style that he likes to play. But I suppose at the moment, they're just needing results. I actually think they'll win this. I do fancy them in this game to get that first win away from home. I think we've seen a lot of improvements in terms of the actual performances. They've scored a lot of goals. I think 12 goals in the previous 4 games. And actually, averaging 3 goals a game at the moment. Wealdstone are coming into this after being thumped by York. I thought maybe that would have been a bit closer based on that. I still don't think York had a finished article. And I thought maybe Wealdstone could have caused them a few issues, but of course they didn't. So I'm going to go for a Sutton win. I'm going to go for a 3-2 Sutton win. How do you see it going?
I've gone with Wealdstone to win.
Good. That's good for the Predictions League anyway.
We're pretty good. We're pretty good at home, to be fair, Luke.
Yeah.
I'm glad that we're playing someone like Sutton because we've not, the last few games, we've not been great. So we got done 4-0 against York, which isn't surprising, but it's the other results prior to that. We lost to Nottingham Forest under 21s in the week. I don't think the performance was great. We ground out a 1-1 draw with Altrincham. We play well against Brackley, and then we've ground out a 0-0 and a 1-1 with Tamworth, Eastleigh and Tamworth. And I think what Wealdstone needs to do is put in a performance that lasts 85, 90 minutes, not 65, 70 minutes, 45, 60 minutes. So I think we really need to, get back to winning ways down at the Vale. Sutton's a nice team to play. Only won 1 game all season. Haven't won away from home. New managers, etc., etc. So we've really got to take advantage of that and try and make the Vale a winning place again, which we haven't been able to do over the last few games. So I'm confident that Stones will win 2-1.
Fair enough then. You're not a little bit feared by the fact that Sutton, the amount of goals that have been scoring recently, or, I know you've mentioned that you think you're really good at home, which you have been, and I think that is something that's key to Wealdstone, particularly being successful, is that home form so far, but not a little bit concerned with the amount of goals Sutton's scoring?
Maybe. To be honest with you, I look at their results and look at the fact they've changed the manager and they haven't won 1 in the last 5. I know they've drawn 4, but they still haven't scored a bundle of goals. They've scored 18. Wealdstone have scored 20, so we still score more goals. Yeah. I just think being at the Vale, if it had been away from home, slightly different matter, probably, Luke, I would suggest. But being at the Vale does give us an advantage, especially if we go downhill in that second half. Teams have started to turn us around, so we kick uphill first, second half, and that sort of, I don't think has helped. I know it sounds funny, but I think Saturday will be all right. I think we will win. It will be close because Wealdstone are inconsistent. Sutton will probably hope to improve, so I think it'll be a close game, but I think Wealdstone will win.
Yeah, I know Halifax, just in comparison, I know they like shooting. Of course, this one stand behind the goal is open to home spots and the other one's empty unless like York or Carlisle come and they'll get the terrace. But, of course, like 95% of the time, we're not playing either of those sides. So they're down the side, aren't they? So what often sides try to do is turn us around because I think it kind of spoils that game plan of maybe seeing it out to half time and second half really going for it when you've got the momentum in front of your own fans. But moving on to the next game is going to be Woking versus Rochdale. Woking will come into this after a bit of confidence, after going to Altrincham and winning against them 3-1. Rochdale themselves are still flying, of course, still the league leaders. But it does feel like a league Neil Ardley type of kind of performance I could see. The game that I suppose he'd like, really physical work, and I think he's trying to portray still this season against a Rochdale side that I think are a lot more nasty than in a good way than what they've been last season. A lot more physical is probably a better word. But I still feel that potentially there's frailties, particularly in the midfield, maybe there, where Woking could get at them. And I feel away from home after Woking have got that win. This is kind of my rogue prediction. I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. How do you see it going?
Blimey, you are confident for Woking.
Yeah. I'm going to try and make up the points because I know you're going to go for Rochdale to win. So I'm trying to get back in the league.
Well, you can go Rochdale to win. You can pick a different result, but Rochdale, they've only let 7 in, Luke. Woking have let 20 in. It's just
but they're coming this on form. I don't think they're an awful side working from what I've seen of them. I think they're themselves in a little bit of a false position. I don't know.
No, listen, I could be completely wrong. I think this is one of the easy ones to predict. Rochdale have only lost 2 all season. They're top of the league. Yes, they did lose to you boys, Halifax, at the beginning of the month. They've scored 27 goals and they let 7 in. Woking have scored 20 and let 20 in. They haven't got a real problem scoring goals, and I think they will score because they're at home. But I think Rochdale will just easily beat them, and it will be 3-1.
Someone's saying they're terrible. I don't think they're that bad. When
terrible.
I've seen them play, I don't think they're awful. I think they've been a little bit hit and miss at times. Someone said, of course, they're a bit of a bogey side as well. I'm just going to put it out. I actually think Rochdale are a really, really good side this season. But I think away from home, long way, Woking will be coming in after a bit of confidence with an experienced manager like Neil Ardley. They have only had 2 defeats at home, I think, and that was actually against Carlisle and was it Forest Green? So maybe they could get something out of this one, but of course you've got to try to think about the predictions league, haven't you, and go for different predictions too. But no, it might come back to bite me. But moving on to the next game, Yeovil v Carlisle. Like I've mentioned with Carlisle, I think they're going to go on a really good run of form now. Against that Forest Green, I think that addition of Con Clark, them having the likes of Feeney back defensively now, they've got a good partnership there. Gillies obviously come into the midfield recently, and he's really settled in now. I'm looking at Carlisle, and I think they're a lot better than what we saw earlier on in that first 10 games or so. I think we've seen a massive boost with the additions and players returning from injury, and I don't think there's many teams that could stop them at the moment. I'm actually going to go for a 2-0 Carlisle win. How do you see it going?
Yeah, I've gone with a 2-1 Carlisle win. I think Yeovil will make it difficult for them, but the quality we've spoken about all night around Carlisle, the key players, will be that wins the game for them. Yeovil they've done okay, haven't they, since Mark Cooper left and Richard Dryden come in, but they've lost the last 2, 3-0 to Rochdale, 3-0 to Boreham Wood. In terms of what Yeovil are had to face, Boreham Wood, Rochdale and Carlisle in the last 3 games coming up, it's like that's a tough gig for any team in this league to have to face. So they were both 3-0. Potentially this could be another 3-0. I think Yeovil will just going to make it more difficult. Going to have to make it more difficult, Carlisle, but Carlisle will come out on top and they'll win 2-1.
Moving on to the next fixture, then it will be Tamworth v Boston, and Tamworth on a very good run themselves, on the fringes of the playoffs, of course, only outside them on goal difference against Boston, who've just been thumped in midweek by Morecambe. I'm going to back Tamworth here. I'm going to go for a 2-0 Tamworth win. How do you see it going?
Yeah, gone 3-1 Tamworth, flying high at the moment. One of the informed teams, as we talked about, knocking on the door of the playoffs. That's going to be huge for them. Boston are reeling after a 4-0 defeat against Morecambe, who've been the whipping boys so far most of this season. they don't let many in, to be fair, Boston. Their last 5, apart from that 4-0 drubbing, 1-1, 1-3-1, only let one in, 0-0 and 1-1. So yeah, actually, I think they'll make it tough for Tamworth. They are away, it is down at the Lamb at Tamworth, and they'll use that to their advantage, and I think they'll win 3-1.
Moving on to the final game and the featured match of the game week, of course, it is the Yorkshire derby between Halifax and York. Looking at the table here at the moment, York sits 6th, Halifax in 9th. If Halifax win, they will go above them for the time being. Of course, York will have a game in hand on them. But of course, Halifax have only had 1 defeat at home all season, which came against Forest Green. Yeah, it's quite a tasty one, this game. There's been some good matches between the two sides recently. Of course, last season, York came from 2-0 down, actually, at York to get an equaliser. The game prior to that, the Shea, that wasn't nice. Of course, we were leading 1-0 and they scored 2 very, very late goals. So I think Halifax will be wanting revenge on them. For both games, to be honest, I think, particularly that home game that we actually lost. I think we deserve to win that game, to be honest. What are your thoughts going into this fixture then?
Well, I mean, the carrot being dangled to Halifax is that, they could overtake York in the league. Yeah, losing to Truro was a bit of a surprise, should they bounce back from that. But I think that carrot of just being in that top 6, Luke, it's there, especially after the season. Sorry, the start of the season Halifax had a little bit of transition with the new management team and some of the players. But in terms of what they've done, that loss last week was the first one in 6 or 7 games, right? So they're going to be looking at York, possibly looking at York's inconsistency a little bit in terms of results and. The performances reflect the scores they're getting. I don't know. Real tough fight. It's going to be an excellent football match. I think the 1,600 York fans going down to the Shea, isn't there? So it'll be a really good football match. Good advert for the National League. I have gone with York winning 3-2, and I think just looking at the firepower York have, I get it right that it's there for the taking, but. Going to be a very, very good football game.
I think it's good to point out York without Fagan Walcott defensively, who is by far their best centre-back, I think, by a mile. He's been excellent, not just in terms of his defensive performances, but also going forward himself this season. He scored a couple of goals for them. I still don't think, and I think it's always difficult for a new manager when you've actually got so much strength in depth. I don't think York have still probably found that settled 11. I think if you actually look throughout this whole season, there's not been many occasions where they've gone in one week, we've won a game, well, we're not going to change it, we're going to keep that 11, we know our strongest 11. It feels like there's too many options. There's too many options there at York at the moment, I feel, for any manager. I said it in the summer when we looked at York, I said the only concern is they're bringing in marquee players who want to start, and that kind of unsettles last season's squad, and potentially that's maybe what we've seen at certain times this year. But I feel like once York do find that settled squad, that settled 11, I should say, they will go on a really, really good run of form. And of course, it's not been an awful start. They're still in the playoffs. If they win that game in hand, I think they're actually level on points with Forest Green, aren't they? But I still think there's a lot more to come from them. At the moment, Halifax, there's that added kind of incentive because of previous performances, them being the underdogs, to, go out and get something out of this game. And, we're on good form. That Truro game wasn't the best, but, we got back to winning ways in midweek in the National League Cup. And, of course, coming up against York, it feels like a perfect type of match for Halifax based on previous history against the better sides. And I think it'll be quite an entertaining one, this one, overall. Like I said, I like the look of Halifax this year, and York, I still don't feel have fully hit that flow yet. So I'm actually going to go for a 2-1 Halifax Town win. And people may call me biased, but even if I wasn't a Halifax fan, and this is the only time I'll say this, I would still be backing Halifax in this game. I think they're on good form themselves. They've only had one defeat at home. Yorkshire without the star centre-back. I've mentioned it. I don't think they've found that best settled 11 yet. I think Halifax are playing York at a perfect time, and I think Halifax will win this game 2-1. Anything to add on to that?
No, that's a fair point. You got to back your team there, Luke, and you've made a rational reasons to why. And I think it's a good football match for the National League. Two good footballing sides. Got the carrots of closing the gap at the top for York, and Halifax closing the gap on York and others in the playoffs. So, yeah, a good Yorkshire derby incoming on Saturday.
100%. I think it'll be. I'm hoping it's going to be a cracker. To be fair, we were on the wrong side of it, but last season was a great game between the two sides at the Shea. It was just unfortunate we was on the wrong side of it, but hopefully, from my perspective anyway, we will get our revenge this season against them. But these are the current scores anyway in terms of the Predictions League. If those weren't with us earlier, it's 93 to 96 to Paul. So I have tried to go for a few different predictions this week to potentially try and get back in the lead, but as well, that could go horribly wrong too, and the gap may be extended. Please remember to like and subscribe as well. It genuinely does go a long way if you can do that. And if you'd like to become a channel member, it is just £2.99 a month. You'll get early access to podcasts and interviews that we do, and you get to use your club emoji as well in the live chat. If there's any members that club emoji isn't there, if you want to use that, then please drop me a message and I will add it. But no, if you'd like to do that, you'd be really helping me out too. Paul, thanks for joining me once again. I do really appreciate it.
No problem, mate. Nice to be on. And good luck to everyone who's going to see their games at the weekend. Safe travels. Enjoy the game. I'm actually on commentary duty for the Wealdstone versus Sutton games. So hopefully, from my perspective, it's entertaining. I've got something to talk about, and I hope we get a win.
What's the record been like for you when you've been on commentary for Wealdstone this season? What's the record like in terms of wins?
Well, I haven't done too many this season because there's 4 of us that share it. But I've been fortunate over the last few years to do some really good games. The last game of the season last year, when we beat Barnet 2-1 in the last minute, the miracle of Dorking when we were sort of looking like we were down and out and going to drop out of the league and end up beating them to go to Oldham and staying in the league. So yeah, I've been really fortunate to do some good games, and but I don't think this one on Saturday is going to be up there with them. But should be good, and it'd be interesting to see how Sutton are under a new manager, so I can come back and report on them sort of next week.
100%. We'll come to the comments finally. Someone said, "Come on, Halifax." That's from a Carlisle fan. We've had, hopefully the mics will be working well.
Yeah, the mics in Wealdstone aren't brilliant. But yeah, I'll make sure they're working, I promise.
We've had James who's come and said, "Well done, lads. Are you going to the Halifax Saturday, Luke?" Yeah, I will be there, of course, going home from uni, as I do for most Halifax games, to be fair, but particularly that one. And then we've also had, coming in finally, we've had Lee, of course, who watches every week. He said, "Top show, lads. Thank you." And then we've also had 5-0 to I think York, to Carlisle to be thumped anyway, or something like that anyway, a bit of banter in the chat. We've had Carlisle Blues who says, "How did York get on against Scunthorpe and Forest Green?" Of course, well, lost and drew, but I don't think that was directed at me, actually. But no, that's enough of me waffling now. Check out our sponsors, Cards Accepted, and we will see you next week. Bye for now.